we'd all love the perfect conditions, but if you wait for them, you will wait and wait and wait, and pretty
Forever.
soon it'll be over.
Welcome to The One You Feed. Thanks for joining us. Our guest on this episode is Austin Kleon, a writer, artist, and speaker. Austin also speaks about creativity for organizations such as Pixar, Google, South by Southwest, and many more. He's the author of the well-known books Steal Like an Artist and Newspaper Blackout, amongst others, including the one we discuss here, Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad.
Hi, Austin. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure to have you on. I've admired your work for a long time, but your latest book is called Keep Going, 10 Ways to Stay Creative in Good Times and Bad. And we'll get to that in just a second, but we'll start like we always do with the parable. In the parable, there is a grandfather talking with his grandson. And he says, in life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love. And the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandson stops and he thinks about it for a second. He looks up at his grandfather and he says, well, grandfather, which one wins? And the grandfather says, the one you feed. So I'd like to start off by asking you what that parable means to you in your life and in the work that you do.
You know, it's very dualistic, which I like. And, you know, we have bicameral minds, so it's kind of impossible not to think in dualities. But for me, I think the wolves both have their place for me. Well, what I try to do is, I don't know that I starve the dark wolf so much as I sort of follow where I'm trying to take the metaphor. I don't know. I don't know any wolves in my life, but you know, I think about the parable. I'm like, where does the wolf go at night? Where does he feed? Because that's kind of a funny parable because you don't really feed wolves; they're wild.
Yes, it's been told as dogs before. Also,
yeah. So it's interesting. So if we switch it to dogs, it's like dark dogs. You know, dogs track things and they run around. And one of the things I feel like I try to do is I try to feed my light wolf with things from the dark wolf, or I try to pay a lot of attention to the dark wolf because I think the dark wolf gives me information. So I'll put it if you want to use another metaphor, I think a lot about poison and nourishment. So there's a lot of poisonous things that I find in my life, you know, like something like jealousy. Let's just take jealousy. Mm-hmm. Jealousy is a very poisoning thing. But jealousy as a feeling is also just, it's information. Mm-hmm. So if you can kind of like hold your jealousy and kind of like look at it like an object and kind of spin it around, figure out where it's coming from. Sometimes jealousy shows you something that you want or something that you're lacking. So then you can kind of think, okay, well, here's the poison. What's the nourishment? What can I? So a lot of times I feel like I'm someone who's driven a lot by disgust and anger, and because I get angry about the world and I get disgusted by things I see. But then I take that information, I think, well, what would be the opposite? So what's the antidote to this poison or what's the nourishment? And then that's what I try to put in my work. And so when people say, oh, your books are so helpful or they're so upbeat or they help me, that's what I'm going for. But I don't think people understand how dark the books begin, like how all the books come from that dark wolf, right? Yeah. How all the books come from, the dark wolf, and then the other wolf is the one I send into the world to greet people. Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think that, it's about really looking at the wolf, really listening to its growl, seeing where it goes when no one's looking.
Yep.
And then figuring out how to spin it. So that's where, like, it's taken me years to figure this out, but a lot of my really good work has to come from a deep place of agitation.
Yeah.
Like I like to think of my work as being fairly positive and nourishing for people, but it usually has its origins in something very kind of dark or ugly or painful.
Yeah. Well, you say it early on in this book that, you wrote this book because you needed to hear it. And my experience is that the people often who have the greatest wisdom to offer are the people who have earned that wisdom the hard way, usually, because, it's something that we've had to work through. I was talking with a coaching client about this earlier, and she was like, I just don't feel prepared to teach people about mindfulness because I'm not totally at peace. And I was like, the fact that you are applying it to the situations this difficult is what's going to make you someday a great teacher, because you're really practicing in real life with this stuff.
Yes. And I would also say that the best teachers, and I'm plagiarizing a writer when I say this, some of the best teachers are the ones that need to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
All of my books are really the result of me not knowing about something. That's the other thing about my books that I think people sort of misunderstand is that, the books come from me trying to figure something out. And then the books are the product of that process of trying to learn something. And then the books are really just me saying, hey, here's what I've learned. But then the other thing that I think is really interesting is what you said. My mom used to be a guidance counselor, and she told me that every counselor she ever met really needed counseling. And so, we're drawn to things in our lives that, what we need, we seek out. And then we become the kind of peddlers, or not peddlers, but we dish out what we found or what we've looked for, and then I think this causes our culture is not, the dualism that you're talking about. One of the reasons I love this idea about the one you feed is, we're in a time in a culture right now where you have to pick one side, where it's very like. We're not really good as a culture right now with ambiguity. We're not very good with people who have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So, for example, it's very hard for people to process the idea that an artist might be able to make beautiful or useful things and not be very beautiful or useful in their everyday life.
Yeah.
And so we're having like this cultural moment where, we can't, if we get information about the artist that contradicts the art, all of a sudden it's supposed to destroy the art. Whereas I've always been someone who, the people I really looked up to when I was younger came from really dark places, and they were not perfect people in their everyday lives, and they did cause a lot of suffering maybe or chaos in their everyday life. And I think that the good thing about the culture now is that we don't celebrate that. We were getting away from that narrative that you have to be destructive in your personal life in order to be creative in your work. But I also think there's a way that can go too far, where we start dismissing the work of people that aren't perfect in their everyday lives. And so I think it's very tricky, and it's a balance right now. And again, the reason I love the one you feed is that if you think about the culture and you think about, human civilization throughout time, it's usually just balancing back and forth between the forces. It's just like things get caught out of whack and things swing back and forth, and it's really just the pendulum. Or if you want to think of it the other way, it's like the big wheel, that turns. And so, but I think like, to find the dark and then shine the light,
Yeah. I love what you said there. I think almost certainly there is, anytime we correct something, we almost always overcorrect. It's almost inevitable that, we swing way over to one side, we swing too far back over to the other, and then maybe there's a little bit of a balancing over time, but yeah.
It's like when you're driving, they tell you when you're driving not to, you don't try to swerve too fast, because in the swerve you get the whiplash and you go too far over, so it's like, I'm not advocating for any kind of like mushy, wishy-washy path, but it is interesting to watch these forces come in play. And the nice thing about staying alive, which I know you and I are both interested in,
Yeah, very much.
is the nice thing about staying alive is you get to see those swings, and that's where the wisdom comes from. You start seeing all the swings, and even in your lifetime, and it gives you a way through. You can see a way through it.
It's one of the reasons that I most wish I could live to be like, 10,000 years old, is just to see how it all goes. When people ask that question of like, if you could sit down with anybody in history, who would it be? I'm always like, can I flip that and sit down with somebody 10,000 years from now to tell me what has happened the last 10,000 years? Because I really want to know.
I'm curious. I mean, like, I always loved, I think it's Seneca, one of those old, 1,000-year-old writers who said, when you read old books, you get to annex their lifetimes.
Yep.
So that to me is always the value of reading, is that if you can go back far enough or read enough people, you sort of accumulate the 10,000 years.
Yep.
It's just on the other side
That's right.
of history. Of course, the thing that as much progress as we make, I'm always shocked at how much life stays the same, especially when you're, when you're reading about, people a couple thousand years ago. It's always amazing to me how it's still, there's still a lot of the same stuff.
Underlying it all, there's still this very basic human tendency to want to be happy and want to avoid what makes us unhappy, and to want to care for the things that we love and avoid the things that we don't love. And I mean, it's a very, in some ways, that core never really changes. That,
love and death.
Yeah.
It's stayed true, and I think that's why, whenever I look into the future, I think a lot about the pandemic and how the pandemic, rather than changing life, has felt to me a lot like it's turned everything up to 11. Like they say in Spinal Tap, it's just like everything gets turned up.
Yep,
it's not like there's any great new. Everything's just cranked up and amplified, and so some of the really good things are even better now, and then the bad or annoying things are even worse. You know, and I feel like the future. The future to me looks a lot like the past. Just, I think that maybe just amplified. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a long-term pessimist, short-term optimist.
No.
So I really feel like, in the end, we're all doomed. But I think I'm very optimistic about the day. I'm very optimistic about what you can give with the time that's in front of you that you can sort of manipulate.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I might be a medium term something, but I don't know what. Anyway, let's move on to the book. There's a part early in it that you say, everything got better for me when I made peace with the fact that it might not ever get easier. You were talking about creating art in that sense, but I think we can apply it to living. Why is it helpful? Why is it good when we make peace with that, when we stop waiting for things to get easier?
I think a lot of this came from being a parent, because when my kids were younger, I thought, God, if I could just get them out of diapers, or then if I could just get them walking, or whatever. And suddenly I realized, like, oh, it doesn't get better. It just changes. Everything changes, And the minute I stopped worrying about when it was going to get better, I just sort of enjoyed the now. You just learn to. I mean, most of the great philosophical texts or the spiritual texts tell us that be here now. But I think for art and creativity in particular, you just harness whatever skills you have, whatever materials at hand. It's very punk rock for me. It's very much like what's in front of you, what abilities you have, what techniques you have, what tools you have. You use them right now in the here and now. And I will say that I've been extremely influenced recently by this book that I read that's sort of it's not very well known and it's out of print. It was by this guy named Joseph Meeker, and he wrote this book called The Comedy of Survival. And Meeker studied two things. He studied literature and he studied ecology. And what Meeker sort of did is he talked about how much ecology mimics comedy. That if you think about animals and the natural world and plants and stuff, there's so much adaptation going on. There's so much improvisation that's going on that, nature almost resembles a comedy more than a tragedy. And what Meeker said is that Western civilization runs on tragedy. This idea that there's a great person, like our dominant narratives are, there's a great person, and they have a vision, and they mold the world into their vision, and they change things. And of course, in a tragedy, it all ends in blood. There's always some tragic flaw, something that brings the person down in the end. And, in a comedy, it's usually about normal people that they struggle, but they adapt and they stay flexible and they're improvisational. And at the end, there's a wedding or there's a celebration, there's drink. And Meeker's point was just that if we're to survive as a culture, it's going to take a comedic perspective. It's going to take a kind of flexible, improvisational approach to life. And if you think about, and so it's funny because I read that book after I finished Keep Going. Well, Keep Going, of course, starts with another modern parable, which is Groundhog Day, the movie Bill Murray's in where he wakes up every day and relives the same day. And I thought it was really funny how here's this book that's super influential on me like 2 years after I read this other book, or a year, or whenever. But I was already influenced by comedy. I just didn't have somebody, kind of showing it to me. And so I think for me, it's just more about seeing myself as a comic character, as more of a, not a Buster Keaton, but or a Charlie Chaplin, but, more just like a guy who's doing what he can with what's in front of him, and being flexible and not having too lofty, just being flexible and adaptive and learning. To me, that's just been like terrifically powerful. And that's when you don't expect things to change. And that was Meeker's great point, is like, if you don't expect the world to change, then you work with what's there. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're complacent. It just means that you work with what's in front of you and you try to make something out of that. You don't wait for the right conditions. This is what you've got. And I think that what I just said has really been, I think, the real message of my work, I hope for readers, is that, we'd all love the perfect conditions, but if you wait for them, you will wait and wait and wait, and pretty soon it'll be over. Yep.
There are no perfect conditions. And, my son just last year graduated college. So I've been
you're on the whole other side.
Yeah, but I related with everything you said all along the way. You're like, well, if he just gets, like, and I got better like you at going like, let me just try and enjoy this scenario and try not to worry too much about the next milestone because, and looking back now, I'm like, well, the worry never totally goes away, or the care, maybe that's the better word. The care is obviously always there. I'm not too much of a worrier, in general. So, but yeah, I think that we had, Rainn Wilson on the show, the guy from Office, and he talked about something that, I don't think he, created this, but I love it. It's this if-then thinking. If this, then, and so, but in the negative sense, if I just had this, then I would do this. And you kind of talk about this at one point in the book. We think if we had the perfect, art studio and we ran around with the right crowd of people and we had all these things, then we'd be able to be creative.
Yeah, that's a very linear, that's like a computer programmer type. That's like logic on steroids type thing, if-then statements.
Yeah.
If I do that's literally how computers run. It's like, if this condition's true, do this. And life just isn't really like that.
Right.
It's not that linear. It's not programmed that way. And so I sort of, my wife says something beautiful that I love, and there's several pieces of fiction that kind of play with this idea. But she said, just once in a while, I'd like to live my life out of order. Mm-hmm. She says, I'd like to live a day where they were babies, and then I'd like to live a day when they were in their 30s, or of course, the whole meaning of life would deteriorate if you got to do that. I mean, it's really the fact that you can't, you have to live it in order. That provides. There's a great book about this, actually. There's a book called Some by David Eagleman, and it's Tales of the Afterlife. He imagines all these different afterlives. And one of them is that you have to live your life in a different order, but it's like, okay, here's 9 years of you brushing your teeth. Here's 2 years of you brushing your teeth, and then here's 30 days of you making love. It's just like, but it what's beautiful about the story is it shows you, and this is the thing about parables, is it shows you the meaning in your everyday life. Is that, you're right. If I did live it that way, it wouldn't have the same meaning.
I wanted to pause for a quick Good Wolf reminder. This one's about a habit change and a mistake I see people making. And that's really that we don't think about these new habits that we want to add in the context of our entire life, right? Habits don't happen in a vacuum. They have to fit in the life that we have. So when we just keep adding, I should do this, I should do that, I should do this, we get discouraged because we haven't really thought about what we're not going to do in order to make that happen. So it's really helpful for you to think about, where is this going to fit and what in my life might I need to remove? If you want a step-by-step guide for how you can easily build new habits that feed your good wolf, go to goodwolf.me/change and join the free masterclass. Yep. That's why, there's such a common genre of writing, which is, sort of letters to your younger self. What I wish I could tell my younger self, because that's exactly it. It's this sense of like, well, I just sure wish at that age I could have the wisdom that I had then, but it simply doesn't work that way. I do think there are ways to help people as we're younger to be wiser, but a certain amount of it is you've got to figure out your own life, and it's going to have its own twists and turns, and that's part of the game.
Yeah. I went through this weird thing recently where my book Steal Like an Artist is turning 10. My book Steal Like an Artist came out in 2012, so it has its 10th anniversary next year. And so we've been working on the 10th anniversary edition. It's going to be like a hardcover, and I wrote a new afterword for it. And, I had to really reflect on, what do you do when you're, as more time has, the thing I wrote in the afterword is, more time has passed in between the me now and the me who wrote that book than the me who wrote that book and the person he was writing it for. Because I was writing it for my 19-year-old self, like, what I wish I had known when I was the young age of 19, when I was like 27 or whatever it was when I wrote that book.
Yep.
And but then there was this really interesting thing that happened when I was rereading the book. I thought, I couldn't write this now. And this is another thing people have a hard time believing if you're a writer, is that if you say that, you say, I couldn't write this now. They say, what do you mean? You were you when you wrote this. And I'm like, but I'm not that guy anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not this person. And I love his energy. I don't know where he's getting it from. And I like his ideas. I like his certainty. And I love his, I read the book and I'm like, yeah, this sounds great. Let me do this. But it's not me. Like, I couldn't do it again. And so it's like, sometimes I think, something I always try to tell young writers in particular is, they want wisdom. Like, and I'm always like, sometimes it's really the idiot or the fool or the amateur or the beginner that really makes the leaps. When you're younger, you should use your raw, nascent, gooey state to really play and figure things out, because the amateur has just so many advantages over the professional, really, and the expert. A lot of my work as a creative person is trying to get back to that full state.
Yep.
It's really because especially in the self-help genre, everyone's like, oh, mastery. You have to achieve mastery. Like, that's what you need to go after and everything. And as a creative person, of course I'm trying to attempt mastery and like I'm trying to put a sentence together. I'm trying to get really good at the craft and things like that. But it's really being able to go back to that full state, that beginner's mind, where I don't know anything. That's where the really good ideas come from. And so it's trying to so I'm always trying to, I have this, and again, this is very influenced by being a parent. I have this idea of the curious elder. What I see my role, because I'm approaching 40 and I'm starting to think about, middle age and how I'm going to do this and the relationship I'm going to have with my kids. And instead of thinking of myself as like the wise elder, I think of myself as the curious elder.
Yes.
I'm very much like, you show me what you're into. I'm going to live, you're going to get the model of how I live from just seeing me. And and what I do and everything, but I'm going to be more interested in you.
Yes.
That's
beautiful.
I'm going to be the curious elder, and you're going to show me things. You're going to teach me, and that's sort of been my MO for for a few years now with my kids, and I'm trying to continue it because I just don't. I'm like what you just said, which I love is that. You could read all the books in the world. I love, reading. That's what I've staked my life on, like books and reading and wisdom and stuff. But at the end of the day, you've got to live your life, and the experience is really what's going to drill it into.
Yeah.
And so I love it. But for me, it's like I get very, because professionally, the thing to do in my position is to be like, I know these things. I'm the expert, and today I'm going to teach you about creativity, or I'm going to sell you my whatever. And I really try to be honest with my audience that I can tell you what I know, which is I feel like a decent amount. But I would tell you that the things that are the most valuable to me are the things you have available to you right now. The things that are the most raw and pure and available, you could get tomorrow, And so that's, of course that's part of the wisdom too, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so much of what you were saying in there reminded me of why I have been so drawn to Zen practice, for big parts of my life, that idea of beginner's mind and, the sense that not knowing, there's a phrase from Zen, not knowing is most intimate. It's the best state to have. And, that same thing that you said there at the end too, which is that every bit of our life is the path. Like that there's a thing I repeat. I don't know what it is, whether it's the 4 bodhisattva vows, it doesn't matter, but I say it, and it's Dharma gates are countless, I vow to wake to them. It basically means everything is a Dharma gate, meaning a path to freedom, a path to insight, a path to awakening. Every little thing. One translation of it says, I vow to experience them, which is a beautiful idea that, like you're saying, whether it's creativity or growing wise or whatever it is, we do have what we need here.
Everything, the way to, it's like I say in the book, it's like, it's ordinary life plus extra attention.
Yes.
And that's how you get the extraordinary.
Yeah.
Everything around you is everything that feels ordinary. If you can just pay the right attention to it, it becomes extraordinary. And that's what all the great texts teach us is that, there's a different level of attention that we can, there are different vibrations, there are different visions that we can have. You just kind of have to poke beyond the surface of what's presented to you.
Yeah, I loved that chapter of the book, very much. It was called The Ordinary Plus Extra Attention Equals the Extraordinary. And I just think that's so great. And it's so in line with, in the Spiritual Habits program I do, we have a module. It's called No Ordinary Moments. That's the basic idea. Like, the way you make an a moment non-ordinary as you pay closer and closer attention to it. And you and I both quote John, I don't know, do you say it Tarrant? I think it is. You say attention is the most basic form of love that he wrote. And I've got another quote of his that I use, which is to learn to attend is a beginning. To learn to attend more and more deeply is the path itself.
I love that.
Yeah, that guy's really fascinating.
I just think attention, attention is one of those things that the greats kind of get around to. I read a really great biography of William James, who, of course, said the famous, my experience is what I choose to attend to.
Yeah.
Just this idea that, I just feel like, the reason to read old books, too, is that, people think that there's some sort of, like, truth or progress that's, like, set in stone. And I'm always, like, fascinated when I realize just how much deep wisdom there is in ancient stuff. Like, for example, in the old days, people thought that your eyes actually shot beams out. That the way that you saw things was that your eyes actually projected. It wasn't that light came and hit your eyes. It's that your eyes actually shone out into the universe and like a spotlight. And, you think, oh, haha, how funny. But then when you really think about it, you're like, well, what is the, because I'm very interested in useful fictions. I'm very interested in things that, like, I guess this is kind of a pragmatic thing, but it's like, okay, what would be the behavioral result of that belief? And the result would be, well, you would feel that you had control over where you put your eyeballs, your eye beams. Where you shoot your eye beams is in your control, right? So, like, there would be a different, if you think about light just hitting your eyes and that's how you see, that's a very passive idea. It's scientifically true. But if you think about your eyeballs as something that shoot out beams and, you look around, then all of a sudden it makes you active.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in, when it comes to ideas, and this is why metaphor is so beautiful and history is so beautiful. It gives us these examples of things that images we can keep in our mind, or stories we can keep in our minds that influence our behavior and how we're supposed to act.
Yeah, I love that. What are some of your favorite ways for deepening attention? I'll just ask that question before I
like that.
Expound upon it.
Yeah, well, I'm a writer and an artist and a musician. So a lot of the ways that I pay deeper attention are about, just practicing my craft. So, for example, drawing for me is a very, there's nothing easier in an artist's tool belt than drawing. It's cheap. It's something you can practice with almost anything. And it's something you can do your whole life. And the minute you sort of really look at something to draw it, then you really see it. Yeah. Because, you think you know what a lamp looks like, but then you really, when you're trying to trace it with your eyeballs, those eye beams again, you're like, wait a minute, this is much stranger and even more beautiful than I thought it was. My friend Wendy McNaughton just gave a really good TED Talk about drawing, and specifically she practices a kind of drawing that's blind contour portraits where you draw without looking down at your paper. And she practices that a lot, and that's something that I do a lot too, and it really becomes a looking activity. So there's that, and then, like, if I want to pay deeper, it depends on what I want to pay deeper attention to. If there's a piece of writing that I really want to pick apart, I will copy it by hand, or I'll type it out, and then I'll go line by line and circle it and look up words. Poems. I was going to mention before, the poets are the people who are really good at taking ordinary life and making it extraordinary.
Yes.
Like, so if you don't read a lot of poetry, I recommend it, Just start like reading, go to like poets.org or some online poetry website. They all have like daily poems or like, there are lots of daily poem newsletters and stuff.
Yeah.
People who don't read poetry, just, start reading poetry every day. Just take 5 minutes. And that's a different kind of attention that if you're just, if you're just going to work or doing your commute, you're not paying that kind of attention that the poets do. So that's something. Close reading, copying. I do that a lot. And if you think about drawing as a form of trying to copy, what's in front of you, that's copying too. Most recently, I'm pointing to my piano back here. I have been blown away lately by how I can take a song that I've heard for 20 years, that I've listened to over and over again, and if I sit down and learn to play it on the piano, all of a sudden it's a new song.
Yeah.
Like I know how it works in a way that I never knew before. But then, some more practical things. Taking a daily walk is a way of paying attention to your neighborhood in a way that you, like if you drive somewhere all the time and then you walk it on foot, that is a revelation. If you walk a way that you normally drive, and if you drive a way you normally walk, you realize how much you're missing or not missing. And so I love taking a daily walk. And then, I'd say walking, drawing, writing.
Yep.
That's pretty much my ways of paying attention. I practiced meditation for a little bit, and I like the way I feel. But drawing and walking are very meditative for me, as is copying. And I do keep I think the most important part of my practice is every morning I keep a diary that's sort of like half sketchbook, half writing notebook. And I just fill like 3 pages, like the Julia Cameron morning pages. I just do 3 pages in the morning. And I find that keeping a daily diary, if I do it right, and what I mean by right is if you just hold a pen and kind of start moving it and let things come out, you aren't just like, oh, what did I do yesterday? Oh, I did this. If it's one of my biggest teachers is a woman named Linda Berry, and she believes really powerfully in this idea that you just kind of start making letters and things come. And she's taught me a lot about, just kind of channel what you're trying to do with those morning pages or with your diary. Is you're not trying to recount life as much as you're trying to figure out what's actually going on. It's not what went on, but what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And I find that morning practice, it really dredges up. It helps me pay attention to my own life.
Yeah.
It helps me pay attention to what I've paid attention to too, which is, I think, is really important.
Yeah, those are all really great methods. One I found too similar. All those are good. I'm an abysmal drawer. It's like it's hard to like really look too closely at life when you're like, well, I've got a stick figure. But no, I sometimes try and look like an artist would look. Like, where are the shadows? Where are the lines? Where are the shapes? Because it all of a sudden gets your mind to go from, as you said earlier, sort of passively taking it in to sort of shining your light beams, on something. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, it's just, because I think that's what artists are so good at doing, is saying, all right, off autopilot, study this thing. Another that is good is taking pictures. There's a great book out there called Zen Camera by this guy, and it's all cool. About photography is a contemplative practice, and it's the same thing. And when I'm sort of doing the practices in that book, it's like as I'm out and about, my brain is engaging in a different way. I am paying closer attention. So I think art is so good for that.
Well, you mentioned like how you try to look at the world like an artist might, like seeing the shadows, and that's such a great point. Is that my friend Rob Walker has a book called The Art of Noticing, and one of the one of the exercises Rob suggests people practice is take a photo walk without a camera. So like you walk around and you look for good shots without actually having the camera there. And then what happens? Well, of course, you see a million things that you'd love to take a picture of.
That's awesome.
If only you had your camera. There is something about, it's funny when I carry a pocket notebook, I have more ideas. And I don't think it's because I have more ideas than I do when I'm not carrying the pocket notebook. It's just that, well, now that's not true. I think actually having this in my pocket, sort of rubbing against my leg all day, the same way your phone, you get that phantom weird thing from your phone being in your pocket. I think having this in my pocket all day, it just invites things. Thoreau said that, your diary was like a nest egg. And, we think of nest eggs now, it's like saving up for the future. No, there's like a thing called a nest egg, it is a fake egg that you put in a nest to get a bird to lay another egg next to it. So he thought thoughts were nest eggs. If you write one thought down in a notebook, it'll invite other thoughts to come down. And so that's why you use but it's interesting how much when you read, because I love reading old books so much, you have to really understand what they're talking about. Because nest eggs, like who has a farm or a chicken coop? I mean, more people than they used to.
Yes.
In some ways, but like, what's a nest egg? So it's like stuff like that. But I love, and it's funny, like some of my friends, because I have a lot of artist friends and people who are drawers, and they talk all the time about how drawing is a different kind of attention than taking pictures. And I think it is a different kind of attention, but I don't think it's a better kind. I mean, it might be a slower or whatever, but I think there's something about taking pictures, because I love to take a lot of pictures too. I think what's fun is to just have like an arsenal of, or not just a tool belt, just all these different ways of paying attention. And then if you can ask yourself, what am I not getting? Like what am I deficient in right now? Or like, what, it's kind of like when you're hungry, if you think about what you really like, what sounds really good, it's usually that's what you need in your diet. If you really kind of think about, you're like, oh, salad, I should really, like if you ask yourself like spiritually or mentally, like, what am I kind of missing here? Then you can kind of look at your tool belt and say, well, maybe I should maybe I should take a walk or something. But I also, with all that said, is like, so much of this stuff is subconscious. You got to kind of train yourself, and then you do a lot of it on autopilot. It's not like I sit around in my office like, oh, I think it's walk time. It's like, that doesn't really happen.
Yep. There's somewhere in the book, I don't remember which chapter, but you quote Kurt Vonnegut saying, just write a poem and tear it up. And something in what you just said reminded me of that line.
Yeah. And Vonnegut's daughter was really funny. She was kind of like, yeah, you first, Dad. You go first, because she was kind of goofing on this idea that, and I use it because I do think it's true. If you could write a poem knowing that you were going to tear it up, that'd be great. Except Vonnegut wouldn't have torn up his poem. That was what his daughter was joking about. Which I love. But I do feel like if you can do things for the doing, it's so hard now because it's so easy to share things. And yes. I think, one of the problems that young writers and artists and creative people in general have is that they haven't really known. I mean, if you're under a certain age, you don't really know a world in which making and sharing were separate. Because now it's like if you make something, you can take a picture of it and put it on your Instagram immediately.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of merging of making and sharing where it can get very heavy if you're trying to make while thinking about sharing.
Yes.
There's something about you need to be in the making state and not thinking about the sharing state. Well, we've all been under surveillance so much and self-imposed surveillance. I mean, we all have so many people have Instagram accounts, and I wrote a book called Show Your Work. So it's not like I'm, I've contributed to this idea that if you want people to know about your work, you have to show it to them. You have to share with them, and in a regular, at a certain frequency and in a certain way. But you can't really do a lot of really good, raw, new, scary, interesting, creative work if you feel like you're under surveillance. And I think part of the problem with having an Instagram or a Twitter or a blog or a newsletter, all these things that we have there, are such wonderful tools to build audience and connect with audience and get our stuff out there and run our lives. You kind of have to forget all that stuff or be able to tune that out in order to get to that raw kind of creative state.
Yeah.
I've tried to do, I am a completely amateur piano player. I have tried to do Instagram lives before as like just fun. Just like I'm gonna jump on Instagram live and play some Debussy. Just as like a fun thing. And every time I do it, I can't believe how much worse I am. Because I'm so
yeah, totally.
Oh no, even though there's like 40 people on there, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, and because I'm not a performer, and performance is a whole different thing than like writing in the studio or composing.
Yes, it is.
Performance is a whole different thing. And so I think about that all the time, how it's like, if you think all the time about, if I'm drawing, I'm like, what's this going to look like on Instagram? It's very limiting.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to have happen to you, So to try to like get away from the surveillance mindset, to try to get away, to disconnect from the world so you can connect with your work. That's something that every creative person, and I would argue any human living today, really needs to figure out. How can you disconnect so you can connect with yourself?
Agreed. I think that is so true. And I feel really fortunate that, I don't know how long it's been now, a decade, maybe? Maybe not quite that long ago, that I sort of with music went, you know what? Like, nothing's going to happen with this. This isn't going anywhere. And I'm just not going to care about it going anywhere. And, it's easy to say. That sounds like I just did it and it was over, right? I'm talking about a process here, but when I reemerged on the other side of it and I just played the guitar and I don't even anymore very often even record like a good idea I have to remember it to do it later. I'm like, well, if I remember it, I remember. Like, it's all sort of you've got a chapter called forget the noun, do the verb, right? So it's forgetting about being a guitar player and just playing the guitar, but it's turned that into a true source of solace and joy in my life, because I really have no agenda on it except that, like, it's very satisfying. Now, in our show, we do all the music breaks. So occasionally, the music shows up in there, but I mean, that is like the lowest form of like, who cares? No one cares, I mean, so most of what I play on guitar never does, but it's just, it's nice to have something like that in life. And I loved something you said in your book. I've been talking a minute here. I'm going to shut up and let you talk in a second. But you talked about making gifts. You said, we're now trained to heap praise on our loved ones by using market terminology. The minute anybody shows any talent for anything, we suggest they turn it into a profession. And boy, that really hit me as so true, because when I let go of the guitar as something that might get me something, it became a solace. But that's not the way we are oriented in today's world at all. We are all taught, if you're good at something, do more of it and sell it.
Anything worth doing is worth doing well, or professionally, or on stage. Yeah. I mean, this is something I learned too late. I think, I sort of knew. I was lucky in that I sort of knew that the musician's life wasn't going to be for me. Like, I met a lot of musicians, and I just knew that life. It's funny because I used to say, like, I don't know, getting up in front of an audience every night and trying to bear, that sounds too hard. And now, of course, like, a big part of my job is like getting up on stage and talking to people. But, for me, it was like I got lucky because I kind of like knew music wasn't going to be a thing, and so it happened to me like that's suddenly became the hobby.
Yeah.
And hobby is become such a pejorative term now. Oh, it's just a hobby. He's just a hobbyist, And at different points in time and in different cultures, I mean, hobbies are what make life kind of worth,
Yes.
I mean, the English have a much different approach to hobbies, for example. There's a really wonderful essay by George Orwell that he wrote during the war. And he said that one of the reasons he felt that the English had resisted fascism was that they were very fond of personal hobbies, things like gardening or puttering around or tinkering. Orwell really thought that one of the reasons that the English people were good at resisting fascism was because they practiced hobbies. If you think about America right now, I mean, everyone's trying to professionalize, and very few people have something they do just for everything is a side hustle or, whatever. And I, particularly with creative people, it's like most of us have tried to turn our hobbies into professions.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes very, very, very important that you find another hobby.
Yeah.
That you find something outside, whether it's gardening or, like whittling, I don't know, whatever it is. That thing that you could do for no reason.
Yeah.
Something that just you said something so beautiful. It's like, once I stopped looking at my guitar as something that could get me something, get me something.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, that's it, really. Like that's it. Once you stop looking at the thing as something that'll get you something, then something can happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, then you can really make something happen. And I do, though, I think the way out of that market mentality is to make gifts. And what I mean by is to just like, like if you're a painter and you're, really feeling, I think like painting something for your mother or something, just like, or for your, just something, or you make something for a hero of yours who's been dead for 200 years or so, just getting into that idea that I'm going to make something for someone else and I don't expect anything in return. I'm going to take the gifts that have been giving me and then I'm going to, pass them on, because that's really what the gift is about. And there's a great book about that called The Gift by Lewis Hyde, where he talks about like all really great art has a gift element in that someone's brought to their gifts from the gifts of others, and then they pass on that gift through their work. So if you can kind of like just pull yourself out of that market thing for a while, long enough to get in touch with that gift again and to kind of grow it, then you can kind of like get back in the game. Or you can just pull it out completely. You can just say, I'm not doing this for work anymore. I mean, if you have that luxury.
Yeah.
And there have been multiple artists throughout history who have said, no, I'm going to work at the post office and write at night, or I'm going to, I'm going to become an insurance vice president of this insurance company, and then I'm going to write these wild poems. And, poets, it was very helpful to me as a young man to look up to so many poets because they all had day jobs.
That's right. Poets, yeah. By and large.
There's never been any market in poetry, and so they've been able to kind of stay pure in a sense.
Yeah. Well, I really related to that. Not that creating a podcast is exactly a deep art, but it was my love. And when it became something that went from something I just did because I loved doing it to something that pays the bills, there is a real change there. And I consistently have to sort of do what you're talking about, which is like how do I get back to what started this? What was the fire that was here?
Yeah.
That, like it takes work to get back to that place.
I mean, I've been thinking a lot. My kids went back to school, and I've been thinking a lot about teachers and just how many teachers. I talk to a lot of teachers, and they all, you have to be passionate to do that, because you are not going to get rewarded in a way that is commensurate with your what effort. You do, especially in this, in this economy. But, talking about, there are so many professions that happens. You're brought to it because you love something, and then it becomes your breadwinning, and like, how do you get through that? That's a big part of the job in some ways. And very few of our jobs train us in that, how to recover some of that joy, how to recover some of that early energy, some of that rawness. You're obviously a musician. I'm a musician. So it's fun to think about how musicians do it. It's Mick Jagger jumping on stage at a bar. It's like a musician, jamming.
Yeah.
Prince used to, when he was on tour, he'd just show up somewhere and play. He'd do his big show at the arena, but then he'd show up somewhere and do do a set and then leave immediately, because he just wanted to play.
Yeah. Can you imagine sitting in a bar and Prince walk in and climb up on stage and just blow the roof off the place? I mean, it would be unbelievable. The guy was so talented. I just think about, it would be mind melting to see that,
I have a friend my friend's name is Matt Thomas, and he was a Prince fan long before I was. And Matt saw him on his piano in a microphone tour. And I just think, oh man, that's a big regret of my life, not going to see Prince when he was here on the planet. So yeah, but I mean, it's finding those things in your life. How can you just practice? How can you just go out? It's like the guy it would be like if LeBron did a pickup game in Akron or something, whatever it was that, you should try to go back to that. And to recapture that energy. I just think a lot about energy these days. I think it's just so, one of the things I love about art and books is that I feel like the good stuff, it's embodied energy. There's some sort of energy that's been locked in the piece. And when the reader, with books, really good books have a kind of energy to them that is activated once the reader comes and opens it up. It's like the reader has to breathe life into it, and then all of a sudden it works again. And all that energy that the writer put into it, it'll be there forever.
Yeah.
When you pick up Moby Dick, whatever weird, dark, crazy energy Melville channeled into that, whoever picks up Moby Dick and opens the page, it's there for them.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is part of the magic of art, and it's part of the magic. It's what really sustains me in my rougher days, is trying to find, I've got books around here where it's okay, I need some of that Linde energy. I need some of that Thoreau energy. I need some of the, I need the Hockney energy. It's give it to, and you just go to it and it's there for you.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up with thinking about the energy that's embodied in great works of art. Austin, thank you so much for coming on the show. You and I are going to continue in the post-show conversation.
Thank you. It was really fun.
If what you just heard was helpful to you, please consider making a monthly donation to support the One You Feed podcast. When you join our membership community with this monthly pledge, you get lots of exclusive members-only benefits. It's our way of saying thank you for your support. Now, we are so grateful for the members of our community. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without their support, and we don't take a single dollar for granted. To learn more, make a donation at any level, and become a member of the One You Feed community, go to oneyoufeed.net/join. The One You Feed podcast would like to sincerely thank our sponsors for supporting the show.